Good morning and welcome to Elevenses at the one-off earlier time of 10 o'clock today. It's a fairly grey day in London, quite warm at last. The temperature's actually warmed up, and I finally dispensed with the heated jacket when I was out running my first training course for a month on Thursday. So what have we got for you in show number 143? Well, bike thieves are attempting to steal bikes from some blatantly obvious areas, and I'll show you a link to that and a photo. Shoaib Akhtar, the former Pakistani fast bowler, has challenged a Pakistani actor to face 6 deliveries from him for the price or for a motorcycle. Walmart fairing comes with a health warning. That's an odd one. Norton could be preparing to launch in India. Just a couple of words on that. And they're also looking to return to racing. And 3 rounds of the BSB Championship are going to go free to air on TV in July. So some dates for your diary there. And finally, discussion point. I'll be looking at the pros and cons of shoulder checks today. So plenty to kick on with. And just a reminder, we will be back at the normal time of 11 o'clock on Wednesday. The only reason I'm running this one at 11 is because I have a presentation to deliver to an advanced riding group at 11 today. So I had to shift this forward or cancel it, and I decided I might as well shift it forward. So settle yourself down for the next 25 minutes or so. Don't forget, if you have a comment, a question, anything you'd like to ask, feedback on the show generally, or even suggestions for something to cover in the future, I'm always open to suggestions there. So do drop me a line with anything you'd like to say. Clive has looked in this morning. Morning, Clive. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Right, so on with the show. The Mail Online is not exactly my regular reading material. I won't go any further than that, but it features a pretty shocking attempt to steal a motorcycle from outside a hospital. Now let me just get the right photo up and I will show you exactly what happened. Here we go. There we go. Should get that up any second now. There, yes, there we are. So what you're seeing there is somebody attempting to smash the lock off a motorcycle parked in the car park at the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. This was Wednesday the 2nd. It was just before noon. As you can see, there's somebody walking by wondering what on earth's going on. It's a pretty brazen attempt, really. If you want to find out rather more about it, there is the full link. I'm just putting it up in the comments section. Fortunately for the owner of the bike, who is presumed to have been one of the staff, the lock did hold. The bike's alarm went off and the 2 thieves rode off. But the incident really highlights a growing problem in London and probably some other cities too. And it's probably it's not unconnected with my own soaring insurance premium. It's just gone up over 20%, which is a huge increase year on year. Considering I haven't made any claims since, I think the last time I made a claim on a motorcycle was 1979. So Motorcycle Online contacted the Met Police for comment. I'm not sure if they got one, but they did quote Met Police figures revealing that more than 9,000 scooters, motorcycles and mopeds were stolen in London from 2019 to 2020. So what are manufacturers, insurance companies and the police doing about it? Well, the effective answer is nothing. The manufacturers, for example, rather than building in more sophisticated anti-theft technology, which they could do, I suspect, very, very simply, very, very cheaply, given that the electronics packages in motorcycles are now fairly sophisticated, they spend their time actually giving the bike dubious benefits like traction control and power modes. Now, if trackers are an option, and 1 or 2 companies are starting to provide these, they're almost all If they are free, they're on a free for sort of a limited time, maybe 12 months, 24 months possibly, and then they're on a subscription-based scheme. Now, frankly, if I've just paid out the wrong side of 10 grand on a motorcycle and I'm already forking out for insurance, do I want to be paying out yet more cash for a tracker? You know, realistically, on some of the machines that are being sold, which are upwards of, you know, sort of 15, 20,000 pounds, I would really want that subscription service to run for life. Personally, you know, realistically, for at least 10 years, at which point the bike's residual value is not going to be so great. What about the insurance companies? Well, again, knowing that we legally must pay for insurance, they can get away with minimum levels of insurance while dressing it up with, you know, sort of garbage like riders clubs, and making you feel part of a team, you know, and all that kind of nonsense. The reality is you get penalized via a postcode lottery, which you can't challenge. There's no grounds for sort of arguing that you don't actually live in the high risk area, or that your bike is you know, sort of not a thievable one. There's you know, there's a very broad brush treatment of motorcycle theft generally, which I find very frustrating. So the insurance companies themselves, of course, do little to prevent theft, because if a bike gets stolen, all they do is bump the premium up. So you know, it's a financial penalty rather than any kind of incentive to prevent theft in the first place. And you know, again, as for the police, they say we're mounting operations to arrest those responsible, using faster bikes to catch criminals. How much faster do you need in a 1250 BMW, for heaven's sake? You know, okay, they do have some scooters which they use for sort of patrolling parks and things like that, but you know, that's a pretty nonsensical statement. They have stinger devices to deflate tires. Well, I'm not sure they actually use those against motorcycles. They also have a forensic spray to mark individuals committing offences, but they have to be there on the scene to do that in the first place. Try getting a response to the report of an attempted theft. You can have somebody standing outside your house smashing your lock off with a sledgehammer. You can be watching them on CCTV. You can phone the police, and that'll be the last you hear of it. You know, I don't doubt claims that they don't have manpower, but the impression I get is a complete lack of interest in vehicle crime. Other than the occasional PR statement, or I have to be honest, they do the occasional sort of big sting kind of operation. They have recovered crates of bikes, but that's largely due to things like the trackers in the first place, which allows them to follow the stolen vehicle. But mostly their help's restricted, telling owners to look after themselves. So the big 2021 campaign from the Met is a new campaign asking Londoners to lock, chain and cover their bikes. So that's it. You know, it's frustrating in the extreme. And if you have had your bike stolen, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'd be interested to hear what happened and how it was dealt with, actually, maybe a feature for another show. So drop me a line on that if you have anything to say about it. All right, okay. One of the weirdest stories of the week, former Pakistani fast bowler Shoaib Akhtar. He was one of the few quick bowlers capable of delivering the ball at 100 miles per hour. Now, I've actually faced somebody bowling at about 75, 80. He was a minor counties cricketer, and this was in a club game, and that was bloody quick, I can tell you. So I have no idea what facing a 100-mile-per-hour ball is like. I probably wouldn't even see it. But anyway, the point being that he's used Twitter to challenge a famous Pakistani actor, Farhad Mustafa, to face an over from him. And the challenge was play 6 balls and 1 motorcycle is yours. Now, Mustafa didn't actually respond to this challenge, but in an even weirder twist, Syed Zulfikar Bukhari, who is a former special assistant to the Prime Minister for overseas Pakistani and human resource development, did. He stepped up to the crease. And what he offered was to face the over, but also to donate a bike for every ball he missed. Shoaib Akhtar then upped the stakes by saying he would give away a bike for every ball that Bukhari was able to touch. So that could be sort of an interesting few minutes on YouTube. As yet, a date for the challenge is yet to be set, but if I do hear any more about that one, I will get back to you on that. That's one of the weirdest stories that I've heard. But if you think that's weird, try this one for size. Some people would undoubtedly argue that motorcycles should come with a health warning. But is this the kind of health warning that you would expect to see on your motorcycle? Can you read that? It says this product may be known to cause cancer and birth defects and other reproductive harm. So what is it that about a motorcycle that could possibly cause that kind of problem? You might think maybe it's vibration through the seat or something, but no, it is this. It is a bolt-on handlebar fairing, and it was sold in the US by Walmart. Perhaps it's no coincidence that when I went online to check the other day, it was marked as not in stock. But exactly what the problem there is, I have no idea. I suspect there's something in the plastic which is carcinogenic. So yes, that's possibly have something to do with its demise from the stock list. Just a reminder, if you are watching your Elevenses today at 10 o'clock. This is an unusually early show. Normally I'm on at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays, so set your watch to clock in at 11 on Wednesday. Don't forget, you can always catch up with these shows if you miss the start or you miss one on here on Facebook, but rather easy to find. They're all over on YouTube. I usually put them up within about 30 minutes. Today it'll be a little bit later, it'll be this afternoon at some point, but you can catch up on YouTube with all these shows. Right, okay, so Norton. Back in the news for good reasons after all the debacle of the Stuart Garner era, and the TVS funded recovery appears to be going to plan. The production is now beginning to roll out of the new factory in Solihull, and the next step appears to be that the Indian owners of this classic British motorcycle marque are clearing the way to market the brand in India itself. Azedown reports that TVS have registered the Commando and Atlas trade names, which should basically allow them to launch those models relatively soon as production ramps up at the new facility. Now, if this was a normal year, it would also be TT fortnight, and I'd certainly be glued to the TV every evening. It's a long time since I've been over there, but I certainly still enjoy the TV coverage. And during the management reshuffle, it was made clear that Norton are considering resuming race plans, and one place they will almost certainly head off back to is the TT circuit. Now, what will they race if they go there? Now, one suggestion is that they'll continue developing the Superlight project. Now, if you do remember this, it was actually 110 horsepower 650cc engine, and that was announced just after the old Donington-based company went into administration. The bike was promised to weigh 158 kilos dry, so give or take a few kilos, probably about 180 wet, which is about 400 pounds, so not too heavy. The price, though, was a bit on the weighty side at £20,000, and it was claimed to be justified by top-notch Öhlins suspension, Brembo brakes, the now obligatory quick shifter, and electronics package. So what could be done to develop that bike for racing purposes? Well, the answer is to use this one here, the Superlight SS. Now, this is a carbon fiber framed special. It's got carbon fiber framed wheels, carbon fiber wheels. You'll notice there's a single-sided carbon fiber swing arm as well. So obviously it's pretty light. 153 kilos, in fact, so it's lost a whole 5 kilos. That doesn't sound right, does it? No, I don't. May have to check that. Anyway, point being that the engine output for this SS model was boosted to 175 horsepower, which you can believe or not, as it's about 100 horsepower more than the conventional 650 would produce. Naturally, it wouldn't come cheap. The price would double to £40,000. I'm not sure what the rules of concerning superchargers in racing are at the moment, but frankly, my guess is that it's unlikely that this particular model will appear. I would suggest that at least in the short term, the V4 is a known quantity and probably far more likely to appear in the short term, hopefully this time next year. Continuing the racing theme, the July rounds of the 2021 British Bike Superbike Championship, sponsored by Bennett's, of course, will be broadcast on the free-to-air television channel via Quest. So BSB races at Knockhill, which is July 9th to 11th, Brands, July 23rd to 25th, Thruxton, July 30th to August the 1st, will all be shown in the UK and Ireland on this free-to-air channel. The Quest will also become the exclusive rights holder to show the highlights package, which will be follow every round on a Monday evening. And that's to complement the extensive live and highlights contents from Eurosport, which is, of course, a pay-to-view channel, even if it's not desperately expensive. But it is good news for motorcycle racing fans after Dorna announced that the French and British MotoGP events would be broadcast live on ITV4 and ITV, respectively. This is quite an interesting development, actually, because you have to ask yourself why they're doing it. You know, people don't give away something for nothing. And the short answer is 25 years ago, late mid-80s into the 90s, if you went off to a British Superbike race at Brands Hatch or Donington Park, the circuits were packed. I remember piling into Brands a bit late one year and standing effectively behind the grass bank because we couldn't actually get up onto the grass bank to see the first race of the Superbike race. So we missed that one completely. How many people were there? I don't know, 120,000, perhaps something like that. But the last time there was a Superbike race shown from one of the UK circuits, you know, you could almost count the crowd on your hand. So I very much suspect this is to get people back into the race circuits, to get them aware that motorcycling is actually a splendidly fun event when it's on a racetrack, and to try to get people back through the gates, basically. There's not, you know, it's a fairly sparse event when there's actually nobody watching it, however exciting the racing is on track. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you are a supporter of Survival Skills on Coffee, you not only get access to these old shows, they're all over there as well. There are hundreds of better biking articles, but I will be running a invite-only webinar tomorrow evening, 7:30. Invites will go out later today. It's still time for you to become a Coffee supporter if you're not already, and I'll add you to the mailing list Toot Suite, and you can pop over and enjoy a free webinar from me. So I haven't got a topic for it yet. I'm still working that one out. I'm still trying to I've been a little bit busy this week, but tomorrow evening, 7:30, if you're interested, all you need to do is join me over on Coffee as a supporter or a subscriber, and you will get your invite. Right, okay, so let's just turn that off again. Jack Linden has said, happened to me back in the 80s. He's talking about a bike theft here, and he says basically, yes, okay. So basically, the anti-crime unit turned up seconds later after he'd, yes, decked them on the spot. Okay, yes, right. Obviously, taking the law into your own hands is a little bit risky, but anyway, I'm glad you kept your bike there, Jack. Right, okay, so final topic of the day, keeping the show a little bit shorter than normal today, and a regular topic of debate and a source of some confusion for newly qualified riders is negative feedback they often get for making too many shoulder checks, or head checks as they are called down under, or blind spot checks as actually I prefer to call them, because that's what you're doing with them. Now, first of all, it's important to understand that car mirrors have blind spots. So that one reason we shouldn't sit in the blind spots is because drivers won't see us, but it's all equally important to realize that motorcycles have blind spots too. We have something around about 180 degrees and a little bit more coverage of peripheral vision, and the mirrors show us pretty much what's behind us, but there are blind areas to the sides. So these blind areas are one of the very first concepts we actually introduced to on CBT. There's a third blind spot directly behind us. Now, it's quite hard to see into that one, and it's quite big enough to hide another motorcycle. If you are following directly in the rider's wheel tracks in front, bear that in mind. It's always a good idea to sit staggered off to one side. Just the same as you have to assume that a driver, if you can't see their face in their mirror, they can't see you. The same applies to a motorcyclist. If you cannot see the motorcyclist's face in their mirrors, they can't see you either. So it's quite big enough to hide a motorcycle. It's even big enough on some bikes to hide a car, as the copper driving the marked up Volvo knew very, very well when I was out on my GSXR some years ago, minding my own business, and on the M40. And I'd watched him, I clocked him on the ramp at the side of the motorway, and I watched him actually move off into the traffic, just about the distance, the limit of mirror vision on my bike. Traffic was quite busy on that particular afternoon. I was in no rush, and I was ambling along the inside lane. But he still felt the need to slide through the traffic. I saw him coming, and the next thing is he disappeared. So I pretty much guessed where he was. He was actually right behind me in my blind spot. And, a quick tuck of the elbow just glimpsed the side of the car, and he was actually about 15 meters behind me at about 55 miles an hour, and I think he expected me to nail it as the traffic eased. So I gave him a good neck twisting look over the shoulder, and that convinced him I knew he was there, and he just backed off and disappeared at the next exit. But it is important to understand there is that blind spot directly behind you. Now, when I started motorcycle training back in 1995, in order to, as the DSA put it, take rear observation, everything in the OSM observation signal mirror position speed lifesaver system, the sort of DSA, DVSA analog of the advanced system, it all starts with rear observation. So before you signaled, you had to take rear observation. Now, back in 1995, the DSA, as they were then, pretended motorcycles didn't have mirrors. So the first thing you had to do before you signal was to look right round over your shoulder, which was basically a neck cracking look all the way behind. And not surprisingly, it wasn't particularly easy to do. And we were supposed to do that if we were slowing down. So, for example, approaching a red traffic light or even a lower speed limit. And even more bizarrely, you were supposed to make this check before you accelerated too, just to make sure that no one was trying to pass you already. Now, not surprisingly, that look was particularly looked on with some disfavor by many experienced riders, and it was one of the reasons that people had a bit of a downer on basic training altogether, because they said it taught you things you didn't need to know. And I certainly agree that the old neck cracker was certainly not necessary. Frankly, it takes a long time to turn your head that far, focus on what's behind you, and then turn back to the front and refocus on what's happening ahead of you. And when riders were traveling at speed, or when the situation ahead was changing rapidly, it actually got quite a chancy technique, particularly if they'd left it all a little bit late to do that check, or they were following a little bit close when they started it. And I still remember with some horror, even now, 2 cars ahead of my trainee one day had a minor collision. I think they both tried to turn right simultaneously, if I remember correctly, and sort of met near side bumper to near side bumper. So effectively blocked the road. And I remember thinking, oh, we need to pull up with a bit of a hurry here, only to see the trainee in front of me do the neck cracker. Fortunately, there was enough space, but it was a bit more of an e-stop than we would actually needed had he just gone straight into the hard braking. So if you didn't make this observation, though, you didn't pass the bike test. You pick up a driving fault for each time you didn't make it. So unfortunately, you had to play by the DSA rules. And that's probably why IM and ROSPA trainers tended to be very negative about rear observations taken by newly qualified riders. But that should have changed once the DSA discovered in 1977, when direct access was introduced, that motorcycles were in fact fitted with mirrors. And finally, we were able to take our trainees out and stop telling them to do the look all the way behind them, but to actually use the mirrors to check the situation behind. Finally, it was common sense, really. It was what everybody knew they'd do as soon as they had a pass certificate. Even the blind spot directly behind you can usually be opened up with a slight sideways dip of the head and an elbow sort of movement. What I tend to do on the bike is tuck the elbow in on one side and just move my head slightly to the side, and usually that opens up the blind area behind with the mirror. And you can even angle the mirrors slightly differently. I tend to set the left-hand mirror up slightly more so that it's showing me what's behind me, whereas the right-hand mirror I tend to set as a bit more wide angle. Obviously in London, where I can be passed on any side at any moment, I tend to change that to sort of like flat on both sides. But out on the open road, I generally have the left-hand mirror set tucked slightly in tighter than the right. So surely, once that neck cracker was abandoned, that should have been the end of the problem, and everybody doing advanced training should have been happy with what riders were doing after basic training. Well, not quite. There are some riders who still think that blind spot checks are a bad idea, but in fact, there are some really, really good places to consider checking our blind areas. Now have a look at this particular photo. That's one of my old trainees, and you'll see what's happening is that she's coming up on a parked vehicle, and she is going to have to move around that parked vehicle as soon as the oncoming car has disappeared. Now look at where I am. Put my dispatch rider hat back on. What might I try to do as soon as that car's passed both of us? Well, the obvious answer is I might try to accelerate past the bike as it passes the truck. So it's a bloody good idea to know about that, first of all, by checking the mirror so you know what the general situation is behind, but also to double check by using a shoulder check to open up the view next to you. So it's into these lateral positions, left and right, just to either side, that we need to look. And it's the gap between the peripheral vision, which extends, as I say, around about 180 degrees, and what the mirrors show us. And all we need to do to achieve this is to do a chin to shoulder look. That's all that is needed. We get this idea that big looks around are actually necessary. They're not. If your shoulder, if your chin piece sort of comes level or up to your shoulder, that is enough. The peripheral vision now extends right into the blind spot, and it will cover the whole area that we need to know about. So we don't need huge head movements when we're doing blind spot checks. So when do we need to do these? Well, it should be pretty obvious, really. Any time that we are moving laterally, sideways, into a different road space, because there is a real risk that somebody might be planning on occupying the same bit of space as we are about to move into simultaneously. Just watch how many lane changes on motorways either have to be aborted or end up with a near miss because two drivers trying to be in the same place at the same time. The same applies to turning left or right. Or even just, as I say, moving out here to pass this parked car, could even be passing a bicycle. So it's entirely possible that somebody could be aiming for the same place as we want to at the same moment. And that is the reason that we do the blind spot check. That somebody could already have been position themselves so you can't see them in the mirror. And so the obvious answer is to supplement the mirror check with a blind spot check. So what's the controversy with advanced riding? Well, one IM exam observer I had was particularly unhappy with a blind spot check that I was making to the left before turning left. Well, all I can suggest there is he'd never ridden in London in heavy traffic, and he'd never experienced how easy it is to use a motorcycle to sneak through on the inside of a line of traffic, and that he'd never been overtaken on the near side by another motorcycle or even a bicycle. I spent years as a courier. I know the kind of gaps I could get through, and sometimes did, and many riders also start left turns far too far away from the curb because that makes it an easy turn. The more you move to the left, the more defensive your position is. So but even so, you can get a motorcycle through a surprisingly narrow gap. And if you make it easy for somebody will go through it sooner or later. So I've been undertaken when I've been about to turn left by cyclists and scooters who are going straight on and ignoring my indicators. I've even been overtaken, laugh if you want, by a jogger in exactly that situation. Somebody running down the pavement. I got slowed up by the traffic ahead. I was obviously turning left. I'd been signalling for some time. I'd overtaken the jogger a few moments earlier, but the jogger was now running faster than I was moving and decided to jog straight across the junction, even though I was about to turn. One of my test trainees had a very near miss in a very similar situation when a kiddie on a bicycle bunny hopped it into the road off the pavement just as he was about to turn left. The examiner was very complimentary about the fact he did a left blind spot check because that was the only thing that helped him see the kid and avoid running into him. So, my old IM observer, would he have changed his mind in these days of kamikaze Deliveroo riders? Perhaps. But there's one objection that stubbornly clings on. And I've been told numerous times in personal unobserved rides or online when I've been writing about the topic, and that's checking the blind spot before overtaking. For example, here's one statement I received. Using mirror and shoulder checks, use mirror and shoulder checks because they're needed, not because you think you ought. A classic example is immediately prior to an overtake, where many motorcyclists start to close up behind the vehicle head, then do a shoulder check before moving out to pass. How long does it take to look over your shoulder and gain any meaningful information? Right, okay, so let's digest that. If you meant the old neck snapper, look right over behind you, then I'd say yes, far too long. And I would also say that if somebody is already moving up and then they do a shoulder check, that's probably not great timing. I would probably say what you need to do is actually be ready to move, then do your blind spot check and then go. But the thing is, if you actually do combine the mirror check and the blind spot check in the same head movement, we not only cover everything we need to know on the offside, but it barely takes longer than a mirror check alone. So all you have to do basically is look into the mirror and then follow it into the blind spot check. And that is all you need to do. And I will tell you, it's incredibly easy for another motorcycle to slip into that blind spot, even one that you've been watching in the mirrors for some time. I will recount very briefly an incident that happened to me some years ago. I was on my FZ 750. I was being followed by a guy on a 750 Kawasaki. We were riding around a sequence of roundabouts. There's one off the motorway, there was one off the motorway link road, and then there were two other roundabouts on the stretch of dual carriageway A road. And for some reason, he followed me through the first three roundabouts and then tried to outbrake me on the fourth and final roundabout. Okay, so I had done my mirror checks each time coming into the roundabouts, and he was behind me. And coming into that final roundabout, I did my mirror check. He was still behind me, and just before I committed myself, I did my blind spot check, and there he was, standing the bike on the front wheel because he'd suddenly realized that he wasn't going to get through the gap before me. So fortunately, I was able to sort of take a slightly wider line than I would otherwise have done, and give him the space to get through the roundabout alongside me. But if I hadn't made that blind spot check, the chances are there would have been a coming together on the roundabout, and we'd have both gone down in a heap. So next week, I'll be talking about something called mirror history, and I'll give you my thinking on that. Mirror history is the idea that you can take that series of mirror checks and know what's happening behind you. You may have got a hint that I'm not convinced by that argument from the story I've just recounted. Right, so, okay, Terry has just mentioned that he has used a little fisheye mirror, a wide angle mirror stuck on the edge of the standard mirror to widen his view. Yeah, a lot of riders do that, Terry. Yeah, if it works for you, that's fine. I have to admit, I tried it. I didn't particularly like them, but that doesn't mean they won't work for other people. All right, okay, that's it for today. Don't forget the Ko-fi presentation if you're interested. All you have to do is sign up as a supporter, and I will get back to you. Well, that's it really. Yeah, I shall leave you now. So stay safe out there. We'll be back on 11 o'clock on Wednesday at the normal time. So thanks for looking in, everyone. See you again soon. Bye for now.